This is The Space Shot, episode 206 for December 6th, 2017, the Cosmosphere Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to The Space Shot, your daily space history, pop culture, and news fix. I'm John Molnix. Today's episode is my conversation with Jim Remar for the latest edition of the Cosmosphere Podcast. I want to share it here because it highlights the incredible work that's done at the museum, and because we talked about two amazing missions that happened this month, Apollo 8 and 17. Without any further delay, here's episode 3 of the Cosmosphere Podcast. Welcome to the Cosmosphere Podcast. Each month we dive into space history and talk about the work that the museum does with artifact restoration, as well as education and outreach programs that are available at the Cosmosphere. I'm your host, John Molnix. You can catch me here on this podcast and my daily podcast, The Space Shot. There's new episodes of the Cosmosphere Podcast available the first Wednesday of every month, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. While you're at it, do us a huge favor and leave a review in iTunes or Google Play Music. Your reviews help more people find out about the show, which helps even more people find out about the incredible work that's done at the Cosmosphere. This month, I spoke with Jim Remar about Apollo 8 and 17, and also some of the artifacts that are related to those missions that are housed at the museum. We also talked about SpaceWorks and the restoration of the F-1 engines from the massive first stage of the Saturn V rocket that were recovered by Bezos Expeditions. I've got some audio from my visit to that facility. My dad even tagged along during that trip, and we both had a blast. Audio from that trip will be out next month due to the time constraints for this episode. Today's show is a bit longer, so let's dive right in. Today I'm talking with Jim Remar. We're going to be going over Apollo 8 and Apollo 17. Welcome back to the podcast, Jim.
Thank you. My pleasure.
It's good to have you back. You're the first repeat guest, so that's kind of cool.
I'm excited and honored.
So we're going to start out Apollo 8, the first mission around the moon. Talk to us a little bit about the history of that mission.
Sure. Apollo 8 is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite mission. Unfortunately, it gets lost in the luster of Apollo 11.
Yeah.
But the first time that human left the gravitational pull of Earth and went to another planet, when they went around the moon. And so for me, that was an incredible mission because up to that point, we had only experienced LEO.
Yeah.
And not knowing what was going to happen, and even if we could get to the moon and back, was a pretty awesome undertaking. And the fact that they did so and did it successfully was incredible. And it obviously was a precursor and paved the way for the momentum or the monumental undertaking of Apollo 11.
Well, I mean, talking about precursors, Apollo 8 wouldn't have happened had it not been for Mercury and Gemini.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Apollo 8 obviously owes its execution and success to the Mercury and Gemini programs.
Yeah.
Mercury really paved the way for humans to begin exploration when they determined that humans could work in LEO, undertake different types of testing and stresses, and then Gemini was really what paved the way for the lunar missions. Without Gemini, there would have been no Apollo 11 or Apollo 8 for that matter.
And speaking of Gemini, if you're here at the Cosmosphere, there's Gemini 10 downstairs?
Yes,
okay.
Gemini 10.
All right.
Yep.
So you've got to see that. That's one of my favorite ones to look at when I'm here. Last time we talked, you talked about how the White Room's your favorite space artifact. Was that one used for Apollo 8?
We're not sure.
Okay.
So there were 3 White Rooms.
Okay.
And unfortunately, there is nothing that indicates which missions came through the respective white rooms. So,
Interesting.
Unfortunately, there's no paper trail that said, okay, missions A, B, and C came through this white room. So we like to joke that, all the historic missions, Apollo 8, Apollo 11, Apollo 13, all came through ours. But unfortunately, we aren't for sure which ones.
I think that's okay. You can cherry pick the good missions.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, look at that picture over there. There's the Earth coming up. Wow, is that pretty. Hey, don't take that. It's not scheduled. You got a color film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color quick.
Oh, man, that's great. Where is it?
Quick.
Down here?
Just grab me a color. A color exterior.
There you go.
That one?
Yeah, I'm looking for one. C368.
Anything, quick.
Here.
What?
Hey, I've got it right here.
Let me get up this here. A lot clearer.
Bill, I got it framed. It's very clear right here. Got it?
Yep. Take several.
Take several of them. Here, give it to me.
Hey, man, let me just get the right setting here. Now, just calm down, Bubba.
Oh, I got it right. Oh, that's a beautiful shot. 250 at F11. Now there's exposure.
I did. I picked you up there.
You sure you got it now?
Yeah, it'll come up again, I think.
One of the things for the Apollo 8 mission was the Earthrise photo.
Mm-hmm.
And downstairs there's a collection of cameras and film canisters. Talk to me about the importance of those artifacts.
Sure. Well, without the photography of the Apollo missions, those of us who remain on Earth in generations to come would not have been able to fully grasp or understand what took place. The images that the astronauts captured are some of the most historic, some of the most beautiful known to man. And so it's an opportunity for us to be able to showcase the hardware that was used. Because what people don't realize is the astronauts had to become almost experts in photography, understanding the camera. For the still imagery, they were using the Hasselblad, which is a very sophisticated, high-end camera. They were utilizing a number of different lenses and configurations, apertures. So not only did the astronauts have to understand the engineering behind the spacecraft, but they had to understand the engineering and how the camera functioned. And that allowed them to take beautiful images. And fortunately, the Cosmosphere houses the world's largest collection of photographic hardware. We have over 1,000 pieces in our collection, many of them flown. It is believed that we have the camera that took Earthrise, though we're not quite sure that is accurate. The camera in our collection that allegedly took Earthrise is a silver configuration of Hasselblad, which is actually the lunar configuration. And so what we don't know is whether Apollo 8 was testing the lunar camera in lunar orbit, but nonetheless, the camera collection that we have in the visitor is able to see is second to none.
The thing with the cameras, it was different types of film too. It was
Absolutely.
like the Ektachrome. There was different types, everybody knows the Kodachrome.
Right.
That's kind of when you think about retro photographs, it's Kodachrome.
Right.
And that was a variant of Kodachrome. Did Kodak make it specifically for NASA?
That is correct.
Okay.
And it was a larger format, so it was 70 millimeter film, as opposed to probably what most people recognize as the 35 millimeter.
Big difference in image quality.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty remarkable. Even if that camera, didn't take Earthrise, that's still pretty incredible to
It
think
is.
about.
Some of the cameras in our collection include flown on the Apollo 17 mission, Apollo 13 mission. In fact, we have one of the only cameras that was brought back from the lunar surface. We have a camera that flew to the lunar surface, was used on the lunar surface, and then returned by Alan Shepard on the Apollo 14 mission.
Wow.
So one of, I think, only 3 cameras came back from the respective Apollo missions, because typically what they would do is take the film magazine and return those, but to decrease weight in the lunar module, they would leave the camera body and the lenses on the surface of the moon.
Better to take back moon rocks.
Absolutely.
Gotta have that. So we'll be talking about Apollo 17 here in just a few minutes. Is there anything else that your favorite part of Apollo 8?
There are 3 things that resonate with me. One is the TLI maneuver. That was the first time that they had done the translunar insertion. What really makes that special is we have the checklist in our collection that was used in the command module for that maneuver. The other 2 things, one, obviously the Earthrise, regardless of who you believe in. If you believe in a higher being, seeing that picture, that image, has to allow you to know that whatever that higher being you believe in exists. The beauty and the majesty of that picture is awe-inspiring. The other, and again, regardless of what your denomination or faith is, the reading from the book of Genesis during that holiday period, that was something that I think, regardless of your beliefs, you can appreciate, and was very emotional for not only the astronauts but for those listening back on Earth. Those 3 things to me really inspire me as it relates to that mission. And again, unfortunately, it gets overshadowed by the subsequent Apollo 10 and Apollo 11. But just to think about what those 3 astronauts felt, the crew felt, as they began their voyage to the moon, and not knowing what was going to happen, given that this was the first time. The emotions had to have been running the gamut. But then to have them return safely back to Earth, setting the stage for what ultimately was mankind's greatest achievement.
We're now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning was the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
So today we went to the SpaceWorks facility, where we saw the place that the F-1 engines from the Apollo program were restored. Jib, why did Bezos Expeditions come to the Cosmosphere?
That's a great question. we had the good fortune of Bezos Expeditions contracting with Cosmosphere to do the original conservation of the F1 engines. And there were 3 reasons why we were chosen. The first and foremost was because of our expertise, our ability to do a project of this nature, which was proven through our restoration of Liberty Bell 7. That really allowed the recovery team to know that they were choosing an entity that had done this before. They knew that we had a successful track record. The other is because of who we are. A museum that exhibits and educates about the history of space exploration, and B, because of our education value. They knew that we were going to utilize this opportunity as a way to educate the public and to teach the public about not only the expedition, the recovery, and the conservation, but the history. So those 3 things really factored into Bezos Expeditions choosing us to do the conservation work.
Talk about the restoration process. Like, what was that like? How
Sure.
long were they out there looking for the pieces?
So if you think of the project in 3 phases, the first phase was the discovery. So they really had to go to where they thought the debris field was, and using side scan sonar sweep the debris field, the area of the debris field, and then hope that they would get some hits that they could then study the radar, the frequency, and determine whether what they were seeing was indeed an F1 engine. So that was the first step. Then the second step was the recovery itself. The discovery was done in 2012, and then in March of 2013, the expedition set out to do the recovery side. They were out at sea for just under a month, just about 4 weeks, and they had studied the data and utilizing the trajectory, the azimuth, taking into account factor of error, the NASA charted impact points. They thought they knew where the area was. What's really amazing is that no one ever saw the impact. So there literally was no eyeballs on impact sites. So they were pretty certain that where they were looking was indeed the impact. The sole objective was to recover something from Apollo 11. But in this specific area, you had 6 other missions that the S1C, the first stage, splashed down in this area. So they were mining a huge area, huge debris field. And the first time that they ever saw the engines was when they dropped the ROV for the first time. The crew itself did not know what to expect. I mean, no one knew whether these were going to be intact, whether they were going to be in shreds, what they were going to find when they got down. So when they dropped for the first time, and this is the area they're working in, not only was large in a square mile sense, but it was also incredibly deep. So you're talking about a ship that is up 3 miles from the surface and an ROV that is working beneath 3 miles. And the first time they dropped in, they saw components and parts, and they knew that the engines had broken apart. It's theorized that the thrust plate, the main plate that the engines were attached to in the S1C, probably remained intact until they hit the surface. The S1C is 110 feet tall, 30 foot in diameter, but was mostly aluminum, so it probably broke up as it began its descent. And we're talking a descent from about 42 miles
high. Yeah.
The thrust plate and the 5 engines probably remained intact until they hit the water, the surface of the ocean. And they probably impacted going somewhere between 400 and 600 miles an hour. And when you're hitting that fast from that altitude, that's like hitting concrete. So they deaccelerated, and then as the air became lighter, as oxygen dissipated the further they went, then they reaccelerated. So again, they didn't know what they were going to get. They quickly realized that many of these components were embedded 3 to 5 feet in the seafloor. So they were going to have to dredge them out, maneuver the 2 ROVs, and then pull these up. So they dropped, and then heavy seas set in. So they were riding out the storm for about 4 or 5 days.
Oh, wow.
And then had a 2 to 3 week period where they were working around the clock through the night, recovering the artifacts. So what they would do is, this ship was state of the art to combat the fact that you had the ship moving in different directions on the surface, and then the ROV down. The ship was equipped with thrusters that allowed it to hold a position even in heavier seas and winds. It also had a winch that mechanically let out and then retracted, so the ROVs were not bobbing up and down as the ship went up and down. So they dropped 2 ROVs. The 2 would work in tandem, providing obviously the light as well as the camera, but then these were the tools, the workers on the seafloor. So you had 2 operators on the ship who were almost like they were playing a video game, manipulating these robots and the arms and the tools to dredge and then hook the engine components up. And then the hoist would drop a huge recovery basket that basically was about the size of this room, and they would put the components in the basket, because it took about an hour and 45 minutes to get down to the bottom, and then it took about another hour and a half to get up. So once you were down, you weren't going to go back up. So they would literally drag all this around, pick the components, and then put them into the baskets. So after a period of about a month being at sea, they were able to recover, I believe it was 18 prime components. So they recovered 5 thrust chambers, which for all practicality is the engine. That's where the combustion started. They recovered 5 thrust chambers, 3 liquid oxygen domes with injector plates. They recovered 2 turbo pumps, 2 heat exchangers, and then 1 nozzle section. So about 25,000 pounds.
Wow.
So when they finished the recovery process, they still at that point didn't know whether they had an engine from Apollo 11 or not. They brought the components back to Canaveral, where the Cosmosphere oversaw the offloading. And then the artifacts were transported from Canaveral, where it was about 78 degrees on the day they returned, to Hutchinson, where the night before they arrived at our facility, we got about 6 to 8 inches of snow, and we're offloading in 32-degree temperatures. So
oh my gosh.
Quite a swing.
Yeah.
And then once here, we began the process of conservation, and that project took us 2.5 years.
Wow. So the restoration process, that's pretty involved.
It is.
Because those engines had spent, almost a half century at the bottom of the seafloor.
Right.
And between the salt water and the pressures, what does that do to artifacts like, the engines or the Liberty Bell 7?
It sure doesn't do them any favors, that's for sure. It really depends on the material. And let me explain. So, for instance, Liberty Bell 7. The exterior of that spacecraft is titanium, Rene 47. I think it's basically a nickel alloy. Incredibly robust materials. But on the inside, you're dealing more with aluminums and weaker materials. And so at that depth, you're combating 3 things. You're combating pressure, you're combating salt, and then you are combating electrolytic activity. So there's a lot of electric energy at those depths, and that electrolytic activity begins attacking the material. So, for instance, Liberty Bell 7, initially the heat shield, which was made of beryllium, was intact, and so that electrolytic activity attacked the beryllium heat shield, and that was really the sacrificial lamb, if you will. So think of a big battery, and that was the anode. So once the beryllium heat shield was basically disintegrated, that moved interior to inside the capsule and began attacking the instrument panel. In the case of the F1, things that were aluminum, stainless steel, copper, that salt and electrolytic activity did severe corrosion and damage. Fortunately, the vast majority of that engine is made up of an incredible material called Inconel, and that is a super alloy, one of the strongest materials known to man, and really withstood the corrosive issues at that depth. The other factor was as it relates specifically to the F1s, depending on where they were found, there were heavy deposits of calcium. So the calcium, especially in the clay of the seafloor, became embedded in those artifacts and began attacking the artifacts as well. And so you could literally see if a thrust chamber had been lying on its side, or embedded to a degree in the seafloor, you could see the corrosion line. Where the artifact was in the seafloor, you could see the corrosive nature of the calcium deposits in the seafloor.
Wow. Calcium, I guess I've never really thought that it could be damaging to something. We're always told, get your calcium, it's good for your bones. Not good for spacecraft. Good to know. So SpaceWorks doesn't just restore artifacts, it preserves the legacy and the history of the space race. Why is that so important?
Well, early on, the Cosmosphere realized that there's only a finite number of spacecraft or space artifacts available. And while those artifacts are well placed in museums throughout the country and even throughout the world, unfortunately not everybody's going to be able to see it and appreciate it. And it's important for us to be able to produce something that is historically accurate, high fidelity, so the public can understand what got us to the moon, how we explored space, to hopefully spark or ignite an interest. If somebody is watching the movie Apollo 13 and is inspired because of what was accomplished in bringing that crew back safely, then in part we've done our job. And so we always want to ensure that we're doing whatever it is, whether it's through our education programs, our exhibits here, or fabricating replicas, doing something to preserve the history, to be able to tell the story, but inspire that next generation. So this is SpaceWorks. We've got two facilities. This is our 6,000 square foot high bay facility where the F1 engines were restored.
Okay.
And then the other building I'll take in is the main shop.
Okay.
So what the guys are presently doing is they are getting this area prepped for the restoration of the original mission control consoles from NASA Johnson Space Center. So
very cool.
We'll bring all the consoles. This is Jack Graber.
Originally, I was planning on including all of the audio from my trip to SpaceWorks in this episode, but I will be sharing that next month instead. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you get each episode as it comes out on the first Wednesday of every month. Now, let's catch up on some news at the Cosmosphere. Today I'm talking with Carla Stanfield at the Cosmosphere about some news and events coming up here in December. Carla, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back.
So what do we got going on in December?
Well, a couple of different things centered on the season. So the first is a members event that we did for the first time last year, and this will be the second annual event, I suppose we can call it, but it's called Science of the Season. It's where we sort of combine the education, the science education, with entertainment. So we have a presentation with Brad Newst over the science of light, and so you'll understand how we see light, how our brains understand light, how light travels, why we see different spectrums and how we see them. And then we'll move into a performance from a musician named Trevor Stewart, who plays a very unique instrument called the Chapman stick. It's a for lack of better term, a bodiless guitar. It's a stringed instrument, and it's able to produce several sounds at one time. So in conjunction with that, he plays a viola, and he had a couple of other instruments last year. He sort of loops them. It's a very immersive experience. You're enlightened mentally through the education, and then being able to listen to such unique music is just a very interesting, different event that we have put on and are looking forward to this year's. That's on the 3rd. It's a Sunday.
Okay.
And then we have, throughout the entirety of kind of the holiday season, a couple of things happening. From November 26th through December 24th in our museum store, we will be offering a free tote bag with every purchase of $25. So we want to remind you that if you have any spacey friends or NASA-centered folks, or just people that are interested in science and the stars, we have great gifts for those people in our museum store. They can also go online and check out our offerings through our website as well. And again, every $25, they'll get a tote bag for that. And then the last thing that I really wanted to mention was our showing of Polar Express. It's been kind of a holiday favorite among families here in Hutch for sure. We offer that movie starting on the 15th through the 31st, excluding a couple of days right there, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. You can see the exact schedule online, but it does look fantastic in our dome, and it's a holiday favorite.
For sure. And the Dome Theater is pretty cool. I've been there a few times before, and I've never seen a holiday movie on it, so I might have to try to come out for that.
I have to say, cartoons honestly look really good in there.
I'm always a fan of cartoons, so
Me too.
I'll have to catch that. Well, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you coming back on.
Absolutely, thank you.
To commemorate not just Apollo 17's visit to the Valley of Torres Litro, but as an everlasting commemoration of what the real meaning of Apollo is to the world, we'd like to uncover a plaque that has been on the leg of our spacecraft that we have climbed down many times over the last 3 days. And I'll read what that plaque says to you. First of all, it has a picture of the world, two pictures, one of the North America and one of South America. The other covers the other half of the world, including Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia. Covers the North Pole and the South Pole. In between these two hemispheres, we have a pictorial view of the moon. A pictorial view of where all the Apollo landings have been made. So that when this plaque is seen again by others who come, they will know where it all started. The words are, "Here man completed his first exploration of the moon, December 1972 AD. May the spirit of peace in which we came be reflected in the lives of all mankind." It's signed Eugene A. Cernan, Ronald E. Evans, Harrison H. Schmidt, and most prominently, Richard M. Nixon, President of the United States of America. This is our commemoration that will be here until someone like us, till some of you out there who are the promise of the future, come back to read it again and to further the exploration and the meaning of Apollo.
Apollo 17, we started today's episode off with a discussion of the first mission around the moon. So I think it's fitting that we're ending with the last Apollo mission to the moon. December is kind of a big month for space history.
Absolutely.
So it's really a great opportunity to sit down and talk. I want to talk about the legacy of the Apollo program and also, future flights.
Sure.
But first, Apollo 17. Talk to me about it.
Apollo 17 is really a bittersweet mission. It's a historic mission, obviously, in that 2 astronauts explored the surface of the moon. They went further and did more exploration than previous missions. But it's absolutely bittersweet because it's the last time that any human has touched foot on the surface of the moon. I guarantee you that the astronauts, Gene Cernan and Jack Schmitt, thought that there would be another mission to the lunar surface long before we have even started to talk about going back to the moon. The fact that we're sitting here in 2017 and it was 1972, December 1972, when that mission left the surface, is really a shame. So on one hand, while that mission is very historic and one that I look at fondly, it's one that as a country we need to realize that too much time has passed in between, and it's time for this country to start moving forward again, and to doing what we do, and that's explore, and that's to chart new territory, try new things, and unfortunately we've lost that. We've lost that inspiration, and I hope as we come up on the anniversary of that mission, we can all pause for a moment, take a step back, and recognize what was accomplished during the Apollo program, but also understand that it's time for this country to start moving forward again.
It's one of the things that we'll talk about here a little bit at the close, but the National Space Council, giving us the news that the moon is going to be a destination here again soon, just as kind of a stepping stone. So hopefully that will materialize.
That's the 3rd time they've had that objective in the last 20 years. I think both Bushes had that as an objective, and now it's an objective again. I'm hopeful that at some point we stop providing lip service to this and actually do it. It's important for a couple of reasons. One, it's important because it begins to expand our exploration back to where we were in 1972, but it also sets us on a path for far greater things, far greater exploration than we've ever considered or contemplated.
Well, in Apollo 17, that was really the culmination of all of the flights, because it was the first time a geologist flew in space.
Absolutely.
So, pushing the boundaries, that was something that Apollo 17 did. What do you think the geological role, exploring the lunar geography, why was that important? What did they end up doing, cramming that in at the last minute, basically?
Sure. Well, I think it served 2 purposes. It allowed science to progress. It allowed a geologist to do what they do, and that's study formations and rocks and the topography and analyze. And that was an important opportunity because it allowed humans to study the surface of another planet, if you will, and to collect specimens and data that otherwise would have been impossible. And it helped scientists to determine the age of the Earth and how the Earth was created, what the moon was comprised of. But the other reason it was important was it was the first time that a non-aviator or test pilot, played a significant role in the mission. And Harrison Schmitt, being a scientist and a PhD and not a test pilot or an aviator, was important in that it signified a shift in mindset and mentality. I think it was at that point that NASA began to place more emphasis on the science and the discovery, and not that the other wasn't important, but for NASA to truly achieve its objectives was going to require a new breed of astronauts that were able to take the studies and the experiments to a new level.
Well, that's something that, whatever the legacy of the shuttle program is, the amount of scientists that flew on those missions is pretty staggering.
Absolutely. I think the shuttle was incredibly important from that perspective, and Apollo 17 was that first step that led to all the science and the discoveries and the testing, the incredibly important things that were accomplished during the shuttle program.
One other thing, earlier today when I was just milling around downstairs, there are some artifacts from Apollo 17
Correct.
just even on display before you go into the Hall of Space.
Yes.
And those flew to the moon.
Right. So Cosmosphere is fortunate to have some pretty significant artifacts, including some Apollo 17 artifacts. We have a exhibit in our rotunda that displays some of the artifacts from that mission. We have photographic hardware from the mission. The docking target from that mission is on display. And then when you go down into the Hall of Space, we have 2 fenders from the Apollo 17 lunar rover on display, and that has a unique story into itself. One of the fenders was damaged, creating the LRV inoperable until they utilized some duct tape and clamps and maps to create the fix. And so along with those fenders, we also have the Albine painting, Fender Loving Care, depicting that fix. And so those are incredible artifacts, and to know that some of these were used on the surface of the moon and then brought back is inspiring.
No matter how far out we go, we're always going to have a use for duct tape.
Absolutely. You got to carry duct tape with you. It was proven on numerous missions in the space program, the importance of duct tape.
Well, when we talk about Apollo 13, I'm sure we'll have to mention duct tape for
Absolutely.
that. So I'm looking forward to that. So what are your thoughts on SpaceX announcing a circumlunar flight? And then more recently, we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, the announcement, for the third time essentially in the last decade and a half, that the U.S. is going to be returning to the moon. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm excited by SpaceX's announcement. In my opinion, SpaceX and Blue Origin are really going to be the forerunners as it relates to space exploration. You also have the Bigelow Aerospace and Virgin Galactic and Sierra Nevadas. They'll be players as well, but SpaceX and Blue Origin have the capital to back it up and to do it. And I think the private sector is going to lead the way, and so for them to announce it, to me, is incredibly exciting. They're not held back by the bureaucratic red tape. They can cut through that, and if a SpaceX or a Blue Origin announces they're going to do something, you can rest assured that it's going to happen. As it relates to our announcement, cautiously optimistic, I suppose, is what I would say. Again, we have seen these announcements. We've heard the rhetoric. Unfortunately, I'll take kind of a cynical, pessimistic point of view, and I'll believe it when I see it.
Exactly.
I'm hopeful that it will happen, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm fairly certain that SpaceX or Blue Origin will accomplish that feat long before NASA and the government space program does.
Something else going along with the announcement that we're, the National Space Council wanting to go back to the moon, Representative Bridenstine, his first part of his confirmation hearing was basically last week at the time of recording this, and if the contentious nature of that confirmation hearing is any indicator of what we're looking at going forward, could end up being SpaceX and Blue Origin beating the U.S. back.
Absolutely. I just think there are too many political games being played, and the appetite to put the money towards an endeavor of getting back to the moon is not what it once was. And I think it's going to take a Blue Origin or a SpaceX to do it, and before A, our government, and B, the public at large gets excited about it again. Fortunately, both companies have the capital and the ability and the wherewithal to make it happen. But until they do, and excuse my language, kick our government in the butt, I'm skeptical.
Obviously, reusability is going to play a critical role in returning to the moon and going beyond to, Mars and elsewhere in the solar system. December is also the anniversary of SpaceX landing an orbital class booster for the first time back in 2015, and then also recovering a Dragon capsule for the first time back in 2010. What are your thoughts on those developments and where you see the industry moving?
Those are all incredibly positive things because it decreases the cost significantly. I mean, one of the reasons why the shuttle is no longer flying is because of the significant cost associated with flying the orbiter. The way that the SpaceX and the Blue Origins have been able to go about it is they've engineered hardware that is efficient, effective, but also is not so astronomical in its price tag that it's become ultimately cost prohibitive. So I think these things are incredibly positive and will only allow those companies to continue to improve and advance at a much quicker pace and at a much cheaper price tag.
What do you think the legacy of Apollo will be 50 years from now?
I'm hoping that the legacy is that was the first step that was taken as humans explore the universe and beyond. I hope people 50 years from now are able to look back on that and say that was a tremendous period of time when amazing accomplishments were achieved, and that it was done with the entire country and world watching and hoping and praying. And I'm hopeful that we can get back to that point where collectively we as humans cooperate in an endeavor that allows us to finish what Apollo started. Not finish, but take up the torch that Apollo had and continue to move forward.
Jim, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Good old Mother Earth is right back in the center. Bob, well, we've got a quiet moment here as I go to deploy that EP charge. I'd just like to say any part of Apollo 17 or any part of Apollo that has been a success thus far is probably, for the most part, due to the thousands of people in the aerospace industry who have given a great deal besides dedication and besides effort and besides professionalism to make it all a reality. And I would just like to thank them, because what we've done here and what has been done in the past, as a matter of fact, what has been done for 200 years, you've got to contribute to the spirit of the group of people who formed the aerospace industry. And I, God bless you and thank you.
Roger, Dean, and we thank you guys.
Now, we're just two little sets of twinkle toes here. There's a lot that goes to getting this rubber running out here that we don't have much to do with. Yeah, I guess there might be someone else that has something to do with it, too. And I've been reading his sign, maybe not from him directly, but his in spirit as we run up and down that ladder. And that's Godspeed, the crew of Apollo 17. And if he's listening, I'd like to thank him, too.
Thank you all for listening to the Cosmosphere Podcast. I hope you'll subscribe to the show so you catch new episodes the first Wednesday of every month. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. It helps more people find out about the podcast and the incredible work that's done here in Hutchinson. Next month, Triumph and Tragedy. For the Cosmosphere, I'm John Molnix. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Do me a favor, since you're still here and I've got your attention, Leave a review for the podcast and the Cosmosphere Podcast on iTunes. Reviews in iTunes are the podcasting equivalent of water and oxygen for astronauts during spaceflight. They're absolutely necessary and missed if they aren't there. Also, while you're in your podcast app of choice, make sure you hit the subscribe button. That way you don't miss any of the daily episodes. As always, the show notes have more information on today's episode. You can hit me up on Instagram and Twitter. Find me at John Molnix. I'm always up to chat. You can also connect with me and the Cosmosphere on Facebook. Just search The Space Shot or the Cosmosphere, or you can also click the link in the show notes. Tomorrow, Apollo 17 and Galileo. I'm John Molnix, and I'll catch you on the flip side.